Hello and welcome to the second of 6 presentations in the Women in Global Leadership series. My name is Kelly Mylink. I am an attorney at Hush Blackwell, but more importantly, I'm a board member of the International Relations Council in Kansas City. We are so glad to have you with us today. The International Relations Council strengthens Kansas City's global perspective by maintaining an active dialogue around world events, global issues, and their impact on our community. As a nonpartisan educational nonprofit organization, the IRC values informed civil discourse, accessibility, and substance as we work to sharpen our community's 21st century global acumen. Whether you're joining us live or you're viewing the recording later, we invite you to learn more about the International Relations Council, including upcoming events on our website at irckc.org, which also tells you how to join the IRC as a member. Around the world, women are transforming how business gets done in sectors from government and foreign policy to the arts and international commerce. Women bring unique perspectives, approaches, and values to leadership roles, and the International Relations Council is proud to present this 6-week series of insightful conversations with women in positions of global leadership. With their help, we'll explore opportunities and challenges for female leaders and that they face in the international landscape and the outlooks and insights that have made the difference for them and their sector. So we hope you'll engage with us today as we hear from women in global leadership in the arts. We welcome your thoughtful questions through the course of the conversation using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So please also check out and share other IRC conversations as we consider a range of critical issues in the coming weeks. We are grateful to our sponsors who've made today's program and the Women in Global Leadership series possible. In particular, Global Series sponsor Dr. Karen Beth Zacharias, Sustaining Series sponsor Stinson, and Supporting Series sponsors Burns and McDonnell, Nicole Gresham Perry, and Hallmark and Hush Blackwell. Thank you for finding value in these conversations. We're also grateful to the Global Conversation sponsor for today's panel, the Lawrence D. Starr Center for Peace and Justice at the University of St. Mary's. I am now pleased to introduce you to our moderator for today's program, who will introduce our panelists and help us navigate the conversation. Consuelo Cruz is the Marketing and Community Engagement Manager for Belger Cartage Service, Inc. and Belger Arts. She has over 15 years of experience forming and cultivating partnerships with diverse stakeholders in nonprofit, corporate, and government sectors. She believes deeply in the value of the arts and education in bridging cultures and connecting communities. She has served as the Director of Latino Cultural Arts Division and Director of Development for Mattie Rhodes Center, as an interpreter, as an adjunct Spanish instructor, and most recently as the Arts Marketing Coordinator for the Office of Culture and Creative Services in Kansas City, Missouri. Consuelo, thank you so much for being with us today. Please take it away.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. Thank you to the IRC for putting this virtual series together and for the invitation to participate. I also want to congratulate IRC for its history of sharing a prism of perspectives, including women's perspectives. And this goes back to IRC's beginnings when the IRC welcomed Eleanor Roosevelt as its first speaker in 1955. I'm thrilled to moderate today's program with such esteemed panelists whose work is inspiring, paradigm shifting, and who exemplify what it means to be pioneering global leaders. Deborah Sandler became General Director of the Lyric Opera of Kansas City in 2012. She's known throughout the opera industry for her strong commitment to artistic excellence, company growth, and deepening community connections. Previously, she was the General Director of Kentucky Opera, where her expertise as both the artistic and management leader of the company gained acclaim for productions of high artistic quality. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you.
Min Jung Kim was named the Barbara B. Taylor Director of the St. Louis Art Museum in June 2021, and she officially started last month. So she's brand new to St. Louis Art Museum, succeeding retiring director Brent R. Benjamin. Kim brings nearly 30 years of experience to her new role, including more than a decade at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, where she was the Director of Content Alliances, managing the collaboration among the Guggenheim, the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia, and the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, the largest museum in Vienna. Welcome, Min, to the panel.
Thank you, Consuelo.
There's so much to cover. Your careers, your trajectories are just mind-blowing. So I'm just going to throw out the first question because we don't have very much time. So can each of you tell us about your career path that brought you to what you're doing now, and what made you decide that the arts was that path for you?
Okay, I'll jump right in. We always tell young singers, if there's something else you can do, do it, right?
Mhm.
Only pursue a career as a professional singer if there's nothing else you want to do. And really the same holds true for all of us, because the arts is a passion, but it's also very much a business. So my path into the arts was a little circuitous. I spent 5 years in undergraduate school because I was originally a math and science major, and I was fighting my own passion for the arts. And finally I said, that's it. And I took a semester where they let me double major in theater and music, and I ended up going into music. And I thought that I would finish my PhD in musicology and teach. I finished my master's degree, finished all my coursework, and then got started doing some development work for an orchestra in Philadelphia. And once I started doing that, I just came alive. And I said, you know, this is a lot more fun than the library stacks, lovely as they are. And so, you know, that was it. You know it, you know, viscerally, you know it. When I walk into a theater, you know, the hair on my arm stands up. So I knew I was in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Min, what about you?
Well, I guess similarly, only in the sense of a circuitous path, but I guess my sort of journey starts way back, having been born and raised in Seoul, South Korea, and really at a young age, realizing that I had no idea what I wanted to do. And perhaps because of that, led me to want to come to the United States, specifically to pursue a liberal arts education and to experiment with many potential interests. And it was in coming to the United States as a very young undergraduate student that I discovered art history, much to my parents' chagrin at the time, in not wanting to become a lawyer or a doctor, and concerned that how might one even pursue a career in this path. So I'm very fortunate that, having discovered a passion, that I've not only been able to pursue a career in this field, but so very pleased and thrilled and honored that not only in having pursued a career in the museum field for 30 years, that it has now led me to where I am currently today at the St. Louis Art Museum.
I think that's really interesting how there seemed to have been like a fight with we're conflicted, because like Deb, you were saying you were a math major and you were fighting that feeling. I felt something similar when I was in college. You know, my arts teachers were saying, why are you doing business, and why do you want to major in accounting? And luckily I found out in time that to graduate, you know, in time in my 4 years, so I wouldn't lose any scholarships, that you know, that I started to lean more into the marketing side. But it did take a while. And Min, like you know, my mother was single mother. She said, I think it's great you do the arts, but maybe it's a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't necessarily encouraged as a career, but you know, like any good daughter, I rebelled. So I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that you also listened to your heart when you made your decisions, because I think that's a big part of what makes life the best, when you pick that type of career. that speaks to you?
I think it's interesting. We've all had that in common. I had
Mhm.
to, I was working on my doctorate and my mother said, well, this is all well and good, but why didn't you go to law school or medical school? So it's
Right.
the same, it's interesting, right?
Yeah. And yeah, and
I think it also creates an incredible work environment in that, as we all, of course, understand that this is a bit of a passion field, but what we also don't talk enough about, which I think is another incredible part of our professions, is that we are surrounded by people who together are drawn by this shared sense of passion, right? Whether it be our peers, our colleagues, our supporters, our constituents are all drawn based on this commonality of a passion. And that's quite a wonderful environment in which to work in.
Mhm. And I also feel that because of that, because it was kind of a struggle, and I see young artists and young people that are coming into this field, I really want to help. I mean, I really feel like, especially if it's, if especially if it's a woman, a young woman, I really want to help them. And I try to find resources or try to share information as much as possible. So that kind of leads me to my next question. How, Deb, I've heard how you've, instigated programs at all of the organizations that you've been in to foster that newer generation and to really advocate also for women in the arts. Can you talk about some of those initiatives and what they were?
Sure, be happy to. So I think that all of our environments are evolving,
Mhm.
and I think that subjects and conversations that may have been on the back burner, fortunately, have moved forward to the front burner. And around 2013, I've always been involved with Opera America, which is the service organization of arts organizations. And Opera America has always been a field in which there were very few women leaders of the large companies. I know that was the case with art museums. I think it's getting better. Min, you can talk about that too, but there was pay disparity. I did a lot of research because we coalesced the opera field, to start something called the Women's Opera Network. And we convened all of the women in the field who heard that they weren't necessarily being viewed through the same lens. They weren't necessarily being treated that way. They couldn't identify opportunities. And I remember the first time we convened at an Opera America national conference, we convened a group of women and we started to talk about it. The uprising, the roar of support from women in the field was overwhelming. And that led to the official organization of the Women's Opera Network, who then went on to try to, and successfully, created programs to mentor women. So there are now programs where women composers, women directors, women conductors are given opportunities and support to be creative. There are mentorship programs so that women in the field can be mentored by women who are at top levels. And I think there's been an explosion of female talent coming to the forefront in the opera field. And it's been wonderful. I mean, who saw women conductors a lot 10 years ago? Very few. More and more prominent. We're not done yet. The work is still ahead of us, but it's not unusual. It used to be unusual. Now it's less unusual. And so these mentorships, friendships that a network can provide, money to support female artists, all of these things that have gone through Opera America are truly wonderful. So that's a few things that have happened.
Great, thank you. Min, what about you? Any resources, any initiatives that you've been involved in that you'd like to share about?
Sure. Well, I'm so new at the St. Louis Art Museum. I can't really speak from this particular position, but I can share with you some things that I've been very fortunate enough to be a part of and contribute to leading in a previous role that I took, most recently at the New Britain Museum of American Art, where I'm coming from, having been its director and CEO. And just to provide a little context, the New Britain Museum of American Art is arguably one of, if not the oldest museums dedicated solely to American art, which is really quite extraordinary on the one hand, but a big part of what I had hoped to do. And I think that in many ways, a lot of what we did was designed to really highlight was not only in focusing on American art per se, but even taking a step back and asking ourselves a very basic, fundamental, but deceptively simple question, which is, what is American art? What is American? What is not? Who is American? Who is not? Whose stories are being told and whose are not? And in that light, to represent greater diversity, greater inclusion, not only in terms of race and ethnicity, but it just so happened that in the year 2020, I was hoping to really raise issues of gender. Now, as it turns out, 2020 turned into a very different year, tragically surrounded around the global pandemic and the coronavirus. But the reason why I wanted to highlight 2020 was because it just so happened to be on the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which was really just the beginning of many more decades to come, but really marked the beginning of the journey of women's right to vote. And so on the one hand, celebrating that as a milestone, but on the other hand, recognizing that the underrepresentation of women unfortunately continues to persist into the 21st century, particularly in the arts. And I can't really speak to the performing arts, but certainly in the visual arts and in museums in particular, the statistics, unfortunately, are glaring in that you see that despite women make up half the population of the country, they are significantly underrepresented in many museum collections, where I think according to surveys of having looked at several major art museums in the United States, 87% of those artists are male. And so when you're looking at anywhere between a 13 to at best 25% representation of women in collections, and the fact that women artists and female identifying artists also equally have such small representation in the solo exhibitions, then you begin to think, you know, we are not fully capturing the full breadth of really not only what American art is, but all the richness that that there is to offer. So it was with that in mind that 2020, I really wanted to dedicate a year where all of the special exhibitions at the New Britain Museum of American Art were exclusively dedicated to women artists and female identifying artists solely. And to be able to provide a platform where during that year, these voices can be celebrated. But furthermore, exhibitions and programs come and go, and they're absolutely important. What more longer lasting impact can we make by actually acquiring works by such artists and having them become part of the permanent collection, which contributes ultimately to the identity of a museum itself. And so I'm very pleased that as a result of doing a full year of exhibitions and programs, we were able to acquire a number of works, not only by women and female identifying artists, but with a very specific focus on women of color in particular. And as a result, significantly increased the representations in those areas. That said, I think to Deborah's point, you know, there's still a long way to go. And I think part of it is not only in doing and committing to such initiatives, but perhaps most importantly, to continue doing them in an ongoing and a long-term way, because in many ways, we all play a part. And as institutions ourselves, understanding that we may also play a complicit role by not doing anything, the only way we're going to be able to make such changes is to do so in a consistent way. So that's something that I'm very pleased that I was a part of, and hopefully the reverberations of such actions by many individuals and many organizations can contribute to changes where it becomes much more the norm rather than the exception.
How would you, thank you, how would you encourage men, I mean, women and men to be complicit, as you said, in supporting these, this representation across the board in the performing and the visual arts, and even, nationally is one thing, but also internationally. How have you, what are some success stories and how you've done that, but also how you've encouraged others to do so?
Well,
That's a complicated question. Go ahead, Minjung.
It is. I'll just speak very generally in that I think it starts out with greater awareness, because knowing that perhaps there has been this kind of an underrepresentation, that alone, I think, is really important. And then to with intentionality, really try and see how that imbalance, so to speak, can really be addressed so that it becomes part of our consciousness with every decision that we make. And really emphasizing in many ways that a big part of this is not taking away, but rather adding to and making the conversation all the richer by adding greater diversity and, quite frankly, a more accurate reflection of all of the voices that are there. So I think there are multiple ways in which to do it, from the micro to the macro.
I think it's when we start to talk about what's going on internationally, a lot of this discussion is cultural, what people believe, what they expect. When we first started the Women's Opera Network, a lot of men showed up. Some of them that I spoke with who run very, very big companies, opera companies, said, I never thought about that. Now that you mention that, I guess it's true. And the field started to expand in opera, at least. And I think that the other performing arts have done this as well by philanthropic support of initiatives which help support women find a place. And so philanthropy has a pretty strong hand in guiding conversations and through funding, increasing awareness of issues. And I think we're seeing this now, not just with gender, but with diversity initiatives. And I think that, it is a slippery slope, because I think that if it goes too far to one extreme, the pendulum swings back the other way, and there's a lot of anger. So I think we need to keep the channels of communication open. But I do think in our world, philanthropy is important. If funders say we're going to support X, Y, and Z, we say, okay, we really need to pay attention to this. And like men, when we commemorated the 100th anniversary of number 19, and we did a 2-part program called When There Are 9, and we commissioned a work called And Still We Dream. And the part of And Still We Dream had to do with the fact that even though the amendment was passed and ratified, there's a lot of work yet to be done. But the more we talk about it, the more topical it becomes. And I think we do raise consciousness. I just think we need to be aware of all of the different factors which contribute to the situation and how to make it move forward in a positive way.
Thank you. I also, when you were talking about how people may not be aware of the disparities, I think that's really a huge first step, because when you look at the leadership of the organizations, not just the collections and how women are represented in the collections, but man, I mean, you both exemplify, changing histories Deborah, you were the first woman to lead the Lyric Opera of Kansas City. And Min, you were the first immigrant, person of color, and the first woman to lead the St. Louis Art Museum. What does that mean for you, being the first? And I'm sure this is not the first time you were the first. What does that mean for you, and what does your approach as a woman, you kind of shared a little bit about that. Well, what does your approach, or women's approach, bring to the work that you say, that you've both said, still lies ahead for us? Min, do you want to answer that first?
Sure. Well, first of all, I will start out by saying it is really a tremendous honor and a privilege, indeed, to be the first woman, to be the first immigrant, the first woman of color director at the St. Louis Art Museum. And I take with that great honor and responsibility a future that I am just so pleased and privileged to be a part of. That said, I also hope that while I'm the first of many more to come. And if anything, if I might be able to contribute to normalizing this for future leaders, whether it be as the director and or senior leadership or the makeup of the museum and the colleagues with which I work with, that is something that I'm very keen to do. As it is in the museum field, there has been growing representation of women who work in museums as a whole, but I think we're still ways in terms of the representation of women, not only in senior leadership, but the situation is as the budget grows, the number of women represented at the helm seems to continue to decrease. So as thrilled as I am to be in this position, the ways in which I might also be supportive of my peers and my colleagues in creating pathways so that indeed whatever support is needed, whether it be as part of mentoring, networking, supporting a wide variety of professional development, because the field has also changed in such a way where I think traditionally museum directors had this rather narrow path of having studied art history, achieving higher degrees, working as curators. A little bit like what Deborah had said earlier, these are nonprofit businesses are still businesses, and the diversity of skill sets that sometimes is needed where you are an art historian, but you're also working in development and fundraising. You also need to understand marketing and communications, crisis management. All of those skill sets are, I think, really diversifying in such a way that I think if I can help support the next generation of and the current generation of women in the field, that's something that I'm very keen to do.
Deborah, do you have anything to add about that?
So this is the third company that I've run, and I've been the only female, running a company for a while now. So Min, when I started the conversations around the Women's Opera Network, I did a lot of research and I looked at what was going on in the theater world, what was going on in the orchestra world. I looked at the art museum world as, and it was a big aha that, the one statistic that always came up was the discrepancy between what women were making and what men were making, and that there weren't that many women who were running the top organizations. I have said to a lot of women when I've spoken that it's great to be a woman, but you have to do your job really well. And I think that there are always some unconscious thoughts that both women and men may hold about female leaders. I've sort of noticed that. I don't want to go into it too much, but there are a different set of expectations for women and for men. I know that the Yale School of Management did a lot of research on what men say, what women say, and how they're interpreted in an entirely different way. You can say the same things, you can do the same behavior, and they're not seen in the same way. So that is something we're still working through. And again, I hope the awareness helps us. But yes, I think we all keep trying to be supportive of women, and that's the path forward. And to include men in the conversation. I think that's really, really important.
For sure. That's kind of like when you were talking about the pendulum swing. You don't want to alienate any one group, because we're all in this together, and we have to find ways to raise all ships, all boats. So thank you for your insights and on that. You know, one of the participants on a previous panel in this series, in the Women in Global Leadership series, said this. She said, I think women, generally speaking, bring some natural superpowers around listening, collaboration, emotional intelligence, and being able to read a room. So my question to you is, to each of you, is what is your superpower, if you feel comfortable sharing this, or what is the superpower that you believe is important to possess as an arts leader?
Wow, that's a really tough
Yeah,
question. I don't know if it's a superpower, but something that I guess has generally driven me consistently throughout my career, and I think that's curiosity. And I think that sense of genuine curiosity about anyone or anything has more times than not generated a really fruitful conversation and exploration that has led to some very successful projects. So hopefully that has been very, it's been something that, whether it be a superpower or something that has really benefited me, something that I've certainly enjoyed.
So I would probably say that the art of juggling is really important. We might call it multitasking, but it's in fact juggling. And I think women are pretty good in general about multitasking and handling a variety of things. And I also think that women are very aware. You could call it reading a room, but it's taking care of different people in a conversation. So if you need to have a collaborative conversation and move things forward, I think women do have a superpower in terms of the sensitivity in a conversation, in terms of getting all opinions expressed, and the nurturing. One of the things that's very interesting about my job, and is not necessarily the same in the opera world, in the orchestra world, the ballet world, or the theater world, is most of those organizations have dual heads. They have somebody who handles the artistic side, and they have somebody who handles the business side. And in opera, the predominant model is that one person handles both. So I have to handle both of those. I am both the artistic director and what you might call the executive director. Therefore, the title's general director. Min, you probably do the same thing.
We do. Sometimes I've envied the model where you separate the business versus the artistic content, but at the same time, there is this symbiotic relationship between the two, where I've also found that it makes sense to have it be coming from a singular voice.
Right, and that's when the juggling, the juggling capabilities come in.
Well, I want to say that I feel pretty fortunate myself to work on the business end, and then also on the art side of things with Belger. Belger Cartage is a 100-year-old crane and heavy haul company that was started in Kansas City and has locations throughout the Midwest. But one of the most important things that I always keep in mind is what Dick Belger, who is the third generation, his grandfather founded the company, says is how important that creative perspective is. And he's the one that started the contemporary art collection that is the Belger art, the foundation of the Belger arts side of Belger. And he said, you probably, he addressed the group one day, and he said, you probably wonder why you might think I'm crazy that I have this art collection and I also have this crane and heavy haul business. But he said, we need that creative perspective that artists bring. And because to him, it's about problem solving. And he said, we as a business are in the business of problem solving for our customers. And when we don't have that, when we stop doing that, we're out of business. So I think what you have both brought up is how important creativity is in all aspects of the business world or our family lives, or it's such an important factor to keep in mind. And it's probably something that a lot of people don't think about as being part of every day and part of what makes things work in the world, in our business world and in the world in general. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's something that we don't often credit the creative sector or creativity enough. Let's see, the other thing that was brought up in just your last two comments was brought to mind was when I was learning more about your work and your career trajectory. There were about 3 or 4 words that came up repeatedly when I was learning more about you, and that was collaboration, partnership, and accessibility. How and for me, that means continued dialogue. That means talking to each other. That means communication, consistent communication. How, these are very polarizing times. How do you encourage that communication, that consistent dialogue in such polarizing times? And how do you think arts facilitates that?
We are, I define opera as, and I don't know if your question was for men or for me. So
for both of you.
For
So
both of
whoever
us,
wants to
okay.
jump in. I'm sorry,
So,
I didn't.
Yeah. I define opera as musical storytelling, right? So there's a narrative. There's a narrative. And I believe that the stories we tell are stories of humanity. They're not stories that belong to one person or another, but they're stories that deal with human emotions and human situations. And clearly, we need to be telling more stories where people sitting in the audience see people who are telling their stories on stage. But at the same time, everyone's stories are everyone's stories. Loneliness, rejection. I mean, I don't know if anybody saw Fire Shut Up in My Bones, which the Met had just done. And it's a story about an African-American young man, but the themes are everyone's stories. And I think, to me, that's a very important point to keep making, but to try to bring as many people in and under the umbrella as possible. And I wish there were a silver wand and we could have all of these conversations right away, but that's not the way it works, right? It takes time, and we all have to walk down the road. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and I think one of the things that I've noticed a lot of what you do, Deborah, is bring in the relevant themes. I mean, this is even before the pandemic. I mean, you had Dead Man Walking, the opera Dead Man Walking, and the programming around that. You also, brought in contemporary works into it, but you somehow found a way to mix that with the traditional works that we're all used to seeing when it comes to opera. And Everest, when you brought Everest to Kansas City too, that was a huge, but how you're making sure that those stories are contemporary so that we can find those commonalities, and commonalities exist with the traditional ones also, but I think it's an easier shift for people to go, oh, well, that's Sister Jean was here at Rockhurst talking about
Mhm,
work. So that's more top of mind,
mhm.
and those connections are more top of mind. So thank you for that work too, and for what you just expressed about storytelling and finding those connections. Min, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Not sure. I mean, Deborah just said it so beautifully, but only to wholeheartedly agree with what she said. Consuela, adding on to what you just referred to, of course, I'm now at the St. Louis Art Museum, which has such an extraordinary collection, which is different from some of the other museum collections that I've been a part of, where in most recently the New Britain Museum, where it was much more culturally specific, or even at the Guggenheim, which was more contemporary and dealing with a particular moment in time. The richness of the St. Louis Art Museum's collection, encyclopedic collection that really spans multiple time periods, geographies, cultures, medium, is actually rather exciting, because at the end of the day, all art and all of the arts were contemporary for its time, regardless of whether it was created 1,000 years ago or just yesterday. And some of the greatest artists really are expressing key aspects of their lives, whatever the situation is. And I think there is a lot that can be learned and gained from this continuity of themes that are being explored, including looking back historically to understand how one might have or might not have been able to grapple with these lived experiences, so to speak. So I think they pose for us a continuation of ideas that are constantly evolving, that I find so incredibly interesting to be a part of this particular field, and to acknowledge that the more ways in which we are trying to come to any resolution of binary topics, of it being for or against, or for it to be this way or that way, right or wrong. It's actually the more interesting conversations happen in these more nuanced gray areas, right? And I think as we dive deeper in that, it gives us not only a better sense of, as Deborah beautifully said, our shared sense of humanity, but in that process, I, for one, find that I learn a lot from it, and either may see someone else's point of view a little bit more clearly, and or in the process, others may see different perspectives, and we all become richer for it as being part of that process.
Mhm. Thank you. There was a question, I wonder, and my apologies because I didn't see it until now, but Barbara Nelson had a question, and I think we kind of touched upon it already, but I wanted to make sure if there was anything else that you wanted to add. Barbara Nelson had a question about, she says, would you comment on the transition of patriarchy to the emergence of feminine energy as communicated by the arts? We kind of covered that a little bit. Is there anything additional that you wanted to add, either one of you?
I know I mentioned the fact that Opera America had started through the Toulmin Foundation a number of grants for female composers.
Mhm.
And the number of works that have been written by women over the last 7-8 years is truly remarkable. It's changed the field. And they have brought their perspective and sensitivity to these works. And there's a female voice. It's not all written in the same musical language, and they're not all about the same thing, but they're very direct. They're very passionate about their topics. And I think it's made an enormous change in the field.
Mhm. Thank you. Min, anything that you wanted to add on about that?
No, just that I think we need to continue these efforts in greater representation, not only in the artists that we show, but the women in the profession, and that it needs to be a continued and an ongoing effort, very much like we've just discussed.
Okay, thank you, Barbara, for that question, and thank you both for your responses. One of the things that I'm starting to notice more from an individual artist standpoint is more residencies, artistic residencies for women who have families or for men who have families, so that it's not just, you know, an artist having to pick up and leave and do the work, or you know, go to the residency on their own, but they can bring their entire family. So I'm seeing more and more of that, and I would love to see more of that. Just be like what you were saying, men be the norm. You know, I heard a story at a commencement at the Art Institute, the Kansas City Art Institute, of an artist. She was one of the speakers at the commencement, and she talked about how she carried her baby to the artistic residency, and how, and this was probably in the 70s, and how she was not looked upon as very positively when she was doing that. So, and I see that's changed, but I see, like you said, that we have so much more to do. Let's see, Cynthia Dubois, you say, I think we need more representation, not just in the arts themselves, but in industries that promote the arts. How can we encourage more women to go into these sorts of arts adjacent careers? Who wants to take that one? Deb, you talked about philanthropy, which is huge. I don't think we talk about philanthropy enough. Talk about arts adjacent, you know, it's maybe not a career, but it's very tied to the survival of the arts.
Right. I'm trying to figure out exactly what arts adjacent careers are. I mean, philanthropy probably is one. Usually, unless it's a specific program, I don't know if there are lots of programs now around diversity, and big national foundations, which a lot of us know, which are supporting diverse organizations. I think that because nonprofit organizations are so affected and work so closely with their boards, that's a really good place for people to understand what some of the issues are and to change their own awareness. And I know in opera that has changed because more women are being hired. Not a sea change, but more. And I think that now it's almost a badge of courage for a board to hire a woman. And to hire a person who identifies as diverse or anything else. Are you seeing that, men as well? That boards are feeling it's sort of a badge of honor that they've gone out of the traditional, you know, circle of candidates?
Perhaps, I guess it depends on the organization.
Yeah.
But I will say that, you know, just from my experience with the St. Louis Art Museum alone, one of the things that I was thinking about when I was considering this position, knowing already a little bit about the institution and how highly regarded it is, and it was for me looking at it from afar. One of the things that I was very curious about was, for such a well-established institution, is there still an openness for continued growth and evolution? Because oftentimes, if you're such a solid, secure organization, you really don't want to do anything different. And with greater interest and focus indeed on diversity, for instance, might this be something that either is addressed really more symbolically as perhaps what you're referring to, just kind of being able to check off a box by hiring someone of a particular gender, race, or ethnicity? Or is this really something that is deeply embedded as part of an institution's commitment and values? And I was very impressed with a full diversity study report that the Board of Commissioners had commissioned, that not only looked at diversity, but was really manifesting in 150 recommendations and considerations that were looking at diversity across the organization, not only in terms of programs and content, but everything from how our endowment investments were aligning with diversity initiatives, recruitment and hiring. So I think it's that holistic approach that is really important, where it's not just about let's take this one thing to indeed be considered a badge of honor, but how does that represent institutional values? And for me, I think it becomes much clearer when you start looking at the kinds of initiatives that are driven not just by staff, but also embraced by board.
Excellent, thank you. And Cynthia did, once you were answering her question, Cynthia did get more specific about the careers which she was referring to as agents, promoters, arts directors. And Deborah, you know, before we got on the line, you were talking about how arts is not really covered by the media. So that's another career, I guess, that could be seen as maybe not supportive, but just informative, or you know, educating about the arts, that we really don't have a lot of that. I mean, if you look at your local paper and how things have changed in their coverage or coverage of the business journal, as you'd mentioned, Deborah, that's another, I guess, art career that communications that we could probably consider as, you know, just sharing more of the story of nonprofits and the arts sector.
I mean, I don't want to slam the Business Journal. They do a great job, but it caught my eye a few weeks ago that they were advertising a webinar, I think, about entertainment in Kansas City. And I looked at the panel, and I was flabbergasted that there was nobody from the performing or visual arts there, or at least from the nonprofit world. And I thought, how could you talk about that in Kansas City and not include these people? So it just.
And also what I'm finding too is that we have a new generation of media folks that may be new to our particular cities. And so it's also about, you know, like you were both talking about dialogue and communications, and making sure that, you know, we're also inviting folks from across different sectors to our performances and to our art events and programming, because you know, there may be a whole new generation that isn't aware of what we know, or they may be new to a particular city. I'm finding that some of the arts, visual artists that I work with have never been to some of the performances like the ballet, and that's the arts sector itself. So that was alarming to me. And that's, you know, that's a matter of, okay, well, so how do we change that, and how do we get more people informed about the performances and the free programs that are out there, and that are within community, that, you know, because now that we're redefining space and performances, not just at the venues that we're traditionally used to, how do we get that word out? And that's I guess that falls on people like me too, about marketing and promoting that. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. Let's see there, I've got let's see.
Just to tag on to that, I think indeed marketing and promotions is important, but a little bit like what you were talking about earlier, I think this is where the benefits of partnerships and collaborations also come in, where there's great cross-promotional opportunities and really engaging multiple constituents for a commonality. And indeed, I'm sure with Deborah, for me too, throughout my career, some of the most gratifying experiences has been through collaborations, not only within the arts, of course, but sometimes with different sectors, where we're truly coming at it, learning from one another. And that, I think, is really where it sparks great creativity, but really cross-fertilization of our respective audiences, and creating unique experiences that really touch upon a much wider and diverse constituent of potential audiences.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. There are a few more questions, and I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. there is one that says, could you address a bit more about fundraising as a woman director? What is the advantage and disadvantage? And how do you communicate your passion and belief to translate into fundraising tools? That's a good question. Anybody want to take it?
Well, I'm not sure if there are any different strategies that I might employ. I'm not sure if there's a difference between fundraising strategies as a woman versus a man. At least for me, what I've focused on that I think has been most resonant is articulating a vision and generating excitement around that vision, and making sure that that is clearly communicated and embraced not only within the organization, but then communicated externally as well. And so it has less to do about gender, but really about creating a sense of purpose and objective that collectively together as an organization, we might be able to move forward on. And I guess maybe if there is anything, just to go back to what we were discussing earlier, including some of the characteristics that Deborah had mentioned about women's success in multitasking and being able to sort of be empathetic and attuned to listening, perhaps in that kind of collective sort of path of moving towards a goal. Those are some things that can be very, very helpful.
Okay.
I totally agree. You said it beautifully.
Thank you. There is one additional question. Can you please discuss the value of community involvement as expressed through volunteerism? We talked about community involvement, and community connections earlier, but I don't really think we talked about volunteerism. We talked about other sectors and how we could collaborate, but is there anything specific that either of you'd like to share about volunteerism and the importance of that?
Well, I think it is tremendously important. We have a group of an auxiliary group, but it's a group of volunteers. And I was going to say they were young professionals, but they were so successful and so passionate that people who may not have originally fit in the age span that they described wanted to join, and they took away young professionals. So it's an auxiliary group. It's called Orpheus KC, and they are passionate about what they do, and they carry the word forward, and they have just been a magnet for people to coalesce around the opera. And so we would never want to underestimate the wonderful volunteers who work with us. They're tireless, and we have 3 different auxiliary groups, all of whom work very, very hard. So they're very, very important.
Well, and for art museums, including the St. Louis Art Museum, we rely and are so grateful for so many individuals who contribute and dedicate their time, their talent, and in some cases, their treasures. One example, of course, is we have a thriving docent program, and they go through rigorous training and education in order to do a number of very important tours that continue to make our collection accessible to the general public. And in a few years, I think we're actually celebrating our 60th anniversary. And they are truly dedicated individuals and a group of volunteers that the museum really values. And they are but one example of a number of different volunteers throughout the organization. And I think in many ways has really identified what makes this museum so special, because it has been through such passion and generous dedication through these volunteers that is really representative of the legacy of volunteers and support and dedication throughout the year. So absolutely vital members of our community.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead. I know we have one more question. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'll see if we can answer this question offline. but I wanted to, for the sake of time, we're right at 1 o'clock. I wanted to hand it back over to Kelly. And before I do, I wanted to thank our panelists for all of the information and the insights shared. And I encourage you all, if you didn't get all of the references to the programs that they've spoken about and the resources and the organizations, to please come back to this recording and Google the Women's Opera Network, for example. Google what the organizations will be doing, and stay tuned. I mean, Min is so new to her role, but I can't wait to see what you do, and I'm gonna keep watching what you're doing, and make a trip to St. Louis from Kansas City. And same with you, Deborah. I mean, the way you have reimagined space and connecting to community is so important. And I hope that more people will know about it, and stay tuned to your websites as well, and what you're doing in terms of the next generation in education too. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for your questions. And I'm going to hand it back to Kelly.
Well, I'll just say another thank you for everyone else for joining us in the second installment of the Women in Global Leadership series. We are very thankful for our moderator and our panelists for this meaningful conversation. And we also thank our global series sponsor, Dr. Karen Beth Zacharias, sustaining series sponsors Stinson, and supporting series sponsors Burns and McDonnell, Nicole Gresham Perry, Hallmark, and Hush Blackwell. Thanks as well to our global conversation sponsor for today's panel, the Lawrence D. Starr Center for Peace and Justice at the University of St. Mary's. For everyone, please, I encourage you to visit our website at irckc.org to learn more about the IRC programs, including the remaining conversations in this series, the Women in Global Leadership series, and also how to join as a member. We look forward to seeing everyone again soon.